You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja.
We love the herb.
It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Thursday, June 22nd, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. It's a great day for a show today. We have got a great load of data to unload for you today. Our special guest on the show, Tom Angel from Marijuana Majority, from Marijuana Moment Newsletter, from massroots.com. There's another one of your lazy stoners, huh? Tom Angel will be joining us to tell us about the new survey data exclusive from Marijuana Majority and Survey USA that shows how Americans are coming around on states' rights to set their own marijuana laws and beginning to come around on the rights of employees to use marijuana in those states. It's a special exclusive drug war data mining interview we'll get to later on in the show. Also on the show today, for Government at Work, we're going to bring you a short 6-minute podcast from the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General, where they discuss the results of a late-breaking report on the 2013 Eric Holder Smart on Crime initiative. Also, in Cannabis Sports Medicine, we speak with Michael Sindrich from the Gridiron Cannabis Foundation on the growth of the medical cannabis sports movement. And in the Radical Rant, I'll point out how Democrats should be more pro-marijuana. They're blowing a golden opportunity to put a wedge in the Republican Party. That's all coming up next.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Putting together the most comprehensive live weekday marijuana news talk program is a full-time job. Now you can do your part to ensure that listener-supported independent cannabis radio journalism can continue by becoming a patron of the Marijuana Agenda. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button. For your $4.20 monthly donation, you'll receive over 20 hours of original first-hour podcasts, plus other materials only available to paid subscribers. Or for just $9.99 a month, become a VIP patron. You'll get over 40 hours of podcasts for the complete program, including Toker Talk Radio, plus ad-free downloads of the segments heard on the Marijuana Agenda. Plus, VIPs get exclusive access to the video replay of the 2-hour live stream show and downloads of the spreadsheets and charts I provide from my years of curating marijuana data sets. Thank you for your support, and remember, I cannot do it without you. Please become a patron today at mjagenda.com.
And now, another episode of Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre. I'm your host, Leonard Pinth-Garnell III. Tonight, we revisit a classic of the cannabis cinema, 1977's Animal House. While not known as a cannabis movie per se, this scene, reenacted by the Royal Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre Company, features a cannabis-smoking professor, played by Donald Sutherland, sharing a joint with his student, Pinto, played by Thomas Hulse, while exploring the nature of the universe. Enjoy.
Verily, it appears as if the entirety of the heavens could be as one minuscule atom in the fingernail of a heretofore unknown colossus. Marvel upon marvel. So, logically, one minuscule atom in mine own fingernail could contain a microscopic entirety of the heavens. Oh, wouldst thou entertain my purchase of cannabis?
For Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre, I'm Leonard Pinth-Garnell III.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at marijuanamoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Thursday, June 22nd, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. Tom Angel at Massroots reports that after a series of victories and setbacks, the fight to legalize cannabis in Vermont came to an end, at least for the rest of this year, on Wednesday. During a short special session during which the legislature convened mainly to pass an annual budget, supportive lawmakers failed to find enough votes to suspend House rules so that a marijuana bill could be considered on an expedited basis. Pro-legalization forces made several concessions to the governor's concerns, moving to add new penalties for use of cannabis in a vehicle by a passenger, use of marijuana in a vehicle with a minor present, and cultivating cannabis at a child care center or after-school program, among other changes concerning police powers. They also revised the makeup of the study commission by adding more executive branch officials in line with Scott's request. After some back-and-forth negotiations, lawmakers and the governor settled on language early on Wednesday. In the early evening, the Senate suspended the rules and enacted the bill by a voice vote without debate. But House Republicans, led by Minority Leader Dawn Turner, weren't willing to get on board. By a vote of 78 in favor and 63 against, the chamber rejected a move to allow the legislation to proceed under expedited consideration. South Dakota Governor Henry McMaster signed a new industrial hemp bill Wednesday, making it legal for farmers across the state to grow the plant. Democratic Representative Russell Ott praised the new law, which he said would, quote, allow our farmers to grow, produce, manufacture, and then sell within our own country a product that should have never been deemed illegal to begin with, end quote, according to WACH-TV. Although now legal to grow, the hemp business is projected to start off small, with only 20 farmers being permitted to grow only 20 acres each the first year. Those interested in farming can start to fill out an application in July. However, there are certain requirements, such as an approved background check that must be completed before the process can begin. Florida attorney John Morgan, who helped bankroll and champion 2 campaigns to legalize medical marijuana in the Sunshine State, culminating in a 71% victory in 2016, says, quote, I'll be filing my lawsuit for smoke as soon as it goes into law, end quote. Morgan is planning to sue the state over new rules expected to be signed by Florida Governor Rick Scott that will ban medical marijuana patients from smoking the medicine. Morgan says state lawmakers didn't quite understand the intent of Amendment 2, which he largely crafted with other pro-medical marijuana advocates. Morgan told Sunshine State News, Amendment 2 restricts patients from smoking the drug in public, but said the underlying implication is that medical marijuana can be smoked in the privacy of patients' homes. After all, why bother to write a clause saying you can't smoke in public if you can't smoke anywhere? Colorado marijuana taxes funded a smirk-friendly $420,000 in scholarships for every high school graduate in Pueblo County, Colorado. Pueblo County Commissioner Sal Pace told The Cannabis that the region's abundant natural resource has made the county a hub for the burgeoning outdoor and greenhouse-grown cannabis industry. An excise tax levied on the plant's first point of wholesale transfer paid for what Pueblo County calls a first-of-its-kind scholarship program. Last year, the excise tax was 2%, Pace said. It's scheduled to grow 1% annually, eventually topping out at 5%. Half of the tax dollars collected go to the scholarship fund, with the other half allocated for community enhancement projects. A recent insurance study links increased car crash claims to legalized recreational marijuana, says a report from the Associated Press. The Highway Loss Data Institute, a leading insurance research group, said in study results released Thursday that collision claims in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon went up 2.7% in the years since legal recreational marijuana sales began when compared with surrounding states. Legal recreational pot sales in Colorado began in January 2014, followed 6 months later in Washington, and in October 2015 in Oregon. Mason Tvert, a marijuana legalization advocate and communications director with the Marijuana Policy Project, questioned the study's comparison of claims in rural states such as Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana with Colorado, Oregon, and Washington that have dense population centers and how that affected the study's finding. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Thursday, June 22nd, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
At Herbie Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every Friday for the Reefer Rock Review with Herb Thrasher from 420radio.org. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
It's like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
Learn more at mjagenda.com.
If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
Marijuana has come a long way since President Richard Nixon signed the law declaring it a Schedule I drug. Since then, activists and lawmakers have been chipping away at prohibition at the state, local, and national level. Now, decriminalization, medical cannabis, and adult marijuana are realities throughout America. Join us as we learn more about how we're legalizing cannabis in this episode of Government at Work.
Today on our Government at Work segment, we bring you a podcast recording from the Department of Justice, and this concerns the recent report from the Office of Inspector General. We told you about this on a previous episode of the Marijuana Agenda that largely supported the 2013 Smart on Crime initiative pioneered by former Attorney General Eric Holder. That initiative, of course, has been rescinded by current Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who promises a crackdown and a return to stronger mandatory minimum sentencing in drug crimes. We turn you now to the Department of Justice's podcast.
Welcome to the latest podcast from the Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General. My name is Stephanie Logan. I'm here with Nadia Snody, a senior inspector in our Evaluation and Inspections Division, to discuss the findings of a new report examining the DOJ's implementation of prosecution and sentencing reform principles under its Smart on Crime initiative. Thank you for joining me today, Nadia.
It's a pleasure being here, Stephanie. Thank you for having me.
Nadia, let's start with the basics. What was the DOJ's Smart on Crime initiative?
In August 2013, former Attorney General Eric Holder announced the Smart on Crime initiative, which was an initiative aimed at achieving criminal justice reform at the federal level through 5 principles, which were to first, prioritize prosecutions to focus on the most serious cases. Second, to reform sentencing to eliminate unfair disparities and reduce overburdened prisons. Third, to pursue alternatives to incarceration for low-level nonviolent crimes. Fourth, to improve reentry to curb repeat offenses and revictimization. And finally, to use more resources to prevent violence and to protect the most vulnerable populations.
And which of these principles did the OIG's review focus on?
Our review focused on the DOJ's implementation of the first 2 principles, focusing prosecutions on the most serious cases and sentencing reform.
All right, let's talk about the first principle. How did Smart on Crime attempt to focus prosecutions on the most serious cases?
Well, Stephanie, the Smart on Crime principle changed DOJ's policies to focus more directly on identifying and prosecuting the most serious cases that implicated clear, substantial federal interests, such as protecting Americans from national security threats, violent crime, and financial fraud, as well as protecting the most vulnerable members of society. Smart on Crime also required the development of district-specific prosecution guidelines for determining when federal prosecution should be brought.
And what about the second principle? How did Smart on Crime attempt to achieve sentencing reform?
Well, Stephanie, this principle sought to reform sentencing to eliminate unfair disparities and reduce overburdened prisons by revising DOJ charging policies so that certain defendants who have committed low-level, nonviolent drug offenses and who have no ties to large-scale criminal organizations, gangs, or cartels would no longer be charged with offenses that trigger the imposition of mandatory minimum sentences. Smart on Crime policies also instructed federal prosecutors not to file recidivist sentencing enhancements in drug cases involving the same category of low-level drug offenders. As background, there's a law that allows federal prosecutors to file what is known as an 851 information in cases where a defendant has one or more prior drug convictions. If a prosecutor files such an information, the defendant potentially faces a higher sentence. Smart on Crime changed the DOJ policy regarding that practice.
And what were the OIG's findings about the DOJ's implementation of Smart on Crime?
We concluded that overall, the DOJ made significant progress implementing the first two Smart on Crime principles, but we also identified some areas where DOJ came up short. First, not all federal charging policies were updated to reflect Smart on Crime principles. For example, despite the new Smart on Crime initiative, the DOJ never updated the United States Attorney's Manual, which is the primary guidance document for federal prosecutors. Second, in a few districts, there was a lack of communication between U.S. attorneys' offices, DOJ law enforcement components, and local law enforcement partners about the new Smart on Crime policies. This risked using limited federal law enforcement resources on investigations that ultimately would not result in a prosecution.
Did the Smart on Crime initiative have a discernible impact on federal prosecutions and sentencings?
Yes, it appears that it did. Now, I should point out that the data we were working with wasn't perfect. It turns out that the data kept by the DOJ was not sufficient to measure the impact of the Smart on Crime policies. For example, several relevant fields of data were missing, and some data was incomplete or inconsistent. So we had to rely on the data from the United States Sentencing Commission, which was a little limiting. But based on the Sentencing Commission data from 2010 through 2015, we found that there were significantly fewer mandatory minimum sentences being imposed in federal drug cases nationwide. For example, the rate of federal drug offenders sentenced without a mandatory minimum rose from 40% in 2012 to 54% in 2015. We also found that the use of recidivist sentencing enhancements became less common after Smart on Crime. For example, the percentage of cases in which prosecutors filed recidivist enhancements decreased from 20.6% of eligible cases in fiscal year 2012 to 17.6% in fiscal year 2014. In fact, this decline occurred even though the percentage of defendants eligible for such an enhancement increased over the same period.
Were these overall impacts similar across the country, or did they vary from region to region?
The statistics I just provided were nationwide trends. However, we found noticeable variations in the number of drug convictions and mandatory minimums imposed in different regions of the country. In some regions, drug convictions increased, while in others, they decreased.
Is this the first time the OIG has done work relating to the Smart on Crime initiative?
No, actually, it isn't. We've issued a couple of other reports that are also related to Smart on Crime. In May 2015, we released a report about the impact of an aging inmate population on the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which addressed in part the BOP's Compassionate Release Program for aging inmates. And in July 2016, we released an audit report that examined DOJ's use of pretrial diversion-based court programs as alternatives to incarceration.
Is the Smart on Crime initiative still in effect today?
No, actually, it's not. On May 10th of this year, Attorney General Jeff Sessions issued new federal charging policies that, in part, rescinded the Smart on Crime policies. But we believe our report highlights lessons to be learned about DOJ's implementation of the Smart on Crime initiative, which can assist and guide the DOJ when it seeks to implement future charging policies and practices.
Thanks for taking the time to speak with us today, Nadia.
It's a pleasure being here with you, Stephanie.
That's it for today. To read our report, please visit our website, oig.justice.gov. Thanks for joining us.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Putting together the most comprehensive live weekday marijuana news talk program is a full-time job. Now you can do your part to ensure that listener-supported independent cannabis radio journalism can continue by becoming a patron of the Marijuana Agenda. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button. If you're an organization or business looking to promote your brand, we have sponsorship patronage available at mjagenda.com. Sponsorship includes 15 and 30-second ad breaks and 6-minute interviews on the podcast, depending on sponsorship level, which begins at $19.99 a month. Thank you for your support, and remember, I cannot do it without you. Please become a patron today at mjagenda.com. And now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
I helped murder families in Colombia.
It was just innocent fun.
I helped kidnap people's dads. Hey, some harmless fun.
I helped kids learn how to kill.
I was just having some fun, you know. I helped kill policemen.
I was just having fun.
I helped the bomber get a fake passport.
All the kids do it. I helped kill a judge. I helped blow up buildings. My life, my body. It's not like I was hurting anybody else.
To combat this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at mjagenda.com.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Welcome, everyone, to this special edition of Drug War Data Mining. Usually I'm the one delivering you the statistics and the analysis, but today we have a special guest joining us and a very, very valuable colleague here in our fight to end adult marijuana prohibition. It's Tom Angel from the Marijuana Moment newsletter, from Massroots, and for this particular segment, the Marijuana Majority. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Russ. It's great to be here and have a chance to talk to your audience.
You know, I got the press release from Marijuana Majority about the poll that you had commissioned with Survey USA, and I was kind of surprised. I didn't realize Marijuana Majority was commissioning polls. Is this the first time you've ever done this?
We have done a small handful of polls in the past. In the lead up to the last presidential election during the primaries, we had done a couple of surveys in some of the early primary states, just trying to make the case that voters in those states wanted the candidates to pledge to respect state marijuana laws. And not surprisingly, we found that voters from across the political spectrum did, in fact, want the candidates to respect state marijuana laws.
And we're finding that out now in this new poll that you've commissioned with Survey USA. Give people the top line on this as far as American support for states' rights on marijuana reform.
Yeah, so this is a national poll. We polled 1,500 Americans this week through the Survey USA polling firm, and we found the highest ever level of support for respecting state laws at 76% of Americans. The previous high was earlier this year. I believe it was in April. The Quinnipiac poll had put the number at 73% of Americans wanting the federal government to respect state marijuana laws. And so, this indicates to me that the more Jeff Sessions gets out there and, sort of intimates that he might want to start coming after state legal patients and consumers and providers, the more public opinion is hardening against a potential crackdown. And so, but top line message here is that if the Trump administration does break the president's campaign promises, his repeated campaign promises to respect state marijuana laws, they are going to see huge pushback from across the political spectrum. In our poll, every gender category, age category, racial category, regardless of party affiliation or level of education, any other demographic the poll broke down, every single one of them has very strong majority support for respecting state marijuana laws.
My question on that would be that the support seems pretty broad, but is it deep? I mean, people will change their vote based on abortion or on gun rights, but are they going to withhold a vote, especially those Republicans? Are they going to withhold a vote based on the marijuana issue?
That's a good question, and to be candid, we don't have data on that. I think what I would say is, even if voters aren't, even if many voters aren't going to make their decision at the ballot box based solely on the question of marijuana laws, I think the thing that we want to get across to the administration and people who have their ear is that, even if they decide from a policy perspective they do want to come after marijuana and shut down what's happening in the states, this is a problem that they don't need. It will be an enormous distraction from the rest of their agenda. And there are a number of traditionally, third-party leaning voters, I think, in the most recent presidential election who decided to go for Trump just because they saw him as an outsider who's going to shake up the system. And a lot of those people like marijuana, or they support legalization. If you go onto Reddit, on Trees, there's still a lot of Trump supporters on there, even in light of the, sort of threatening comments that Sessions and Spicer have made over the past several months. If they do, in fact, move ahead with a crackdown, I think, a lot of those types of people are going to very quickly withdraw their remaining support. So, I don't know if a future election will come down solely on this issue, but if, it won't be good for them. It'll cause them problems that they don't need. They're already, sort of trying to keep their heads above water on a number of other issues.
Yeah, there are a lot of irons in the fire, so to speak. I want to get into some of these other questions on the poll that I found fascinating. And the first question is one I've never seen asked before on a poll, although maybe I haven't seen them all. But it asks, do you understand the difference between medical marijuana and recreational marijuana? Overwhelming majorities do. But I was interested in the crosstab on that. Is there a difference between people who say they understand that difference and how they feel versus the ones who don't get the difference and what their reactions are?
That's a great question, and I'm embarrassed to say I haven't really looked into the results of that question yet because, to be candid with you, we actually didn't pay Survey USA to attack that question on at the front. They suggested it, as a free question, just because these questions that we paid for were tacked onto a broader national poll, and so they wanted some sort of transitional question in there, basically just to prompt the respondents that were about to ask them about marijuana.
Okay.
So yeah, it's interesting. In response to that question, it says 88% of people do understand the difference between medical and recreational marijuana. Of course, marijuana is marijuana, and so it's kind of an interesting or sort of a weird thing to ask.
Good point. All right, let's get to the last three questions that dig a little deeper into people's attitudes about particular issues with regard to employment and marijuana use. Question 3 asks, some athletes say marijuana is a good alternative painkiller to opioids and prescription drugs, but the National Football League and Ultimate Fighting Championship suspend players for marijuana use, even if marijuana is legal in the state where the player lives. Should athletes be able to use marijuana in states where it is legal to do so, or should they be suspended even if they've broken no law? The reactions to this were very, very telling. Tell our listeners about that.
Yeah, so on this and a couple of other questions that I assume we'll talk about in a few minutes, we found that more voters supported than opposed letting people be athletes or, in the other questions, journalists or gun owners without punishment for their marijuana use. And really, we weren't sure what we were going to get in response to these questions. It's kind of this. I guess I describe it as kind of an emerging sort of side issue that doesn't get a lot of attention, and that's the fact that even when we succeed, when our movement succeeds in removing criminalization for marijuana, there still is this persisting discrimination from the private sector in the workplace, and from the government in terms of collateral consequences and blocking access to certain benefits or rights that other people happen to enjoy. There's also implications for parental rights and other areas. And so we just decided to sort of throw these questions out there and see what happened. And as I said, in all three of these questions on athletes, journalists, and gun owners, we did get more people supporting than opposing the rights of cannabis consumers, but there was a significant amount of uncertainty and a significant number of people saying, I'm just not sure about that in response to those questions. And I think that really highlights that point, which is that, the focus, at least in the media, the public consciousness is just the question of legalization, yes or no. And there are all these side issues that I think people aren't really paying attention to. And so it might have, it's probably the case that a lot of these respondents who Survey USA called for us over the past few days, this is probably the first time they're even hearing about the fact that professional athletes get suspended for using marijuana, even if it's legal in their state, or news organizations like the New York Times and the Washington Post drug test journalists before they're actually allowed to byline stories, or the government won't let you purchase a firearm if you are a person who consumes marijuana.
Yeah, that's a really good point about how our activism in getting these poll questions out actually does us a favor in informing some of the public about these issues that for most people, marijuana is not on their radar, and this is probably brand new to them. Let me break this down for the folks listening. The first question was about athletes like football players and mixed martial artists. Second question was about journalists for the New York Times and Washington Post and such. A third question about the gun rights being suspended or forfeit once you are a legal marijuana user in any kind. And it's very interesting because, as you said, the unsurety was pretty high on these. All 14 to 16% people saying they're not sure. And then overall, a plurality, 46% saying athletes should be able to use, 50% saying journalists should be able to use, 48% saying gun owners should be able to use. But where we look down at the party affiliation, Republicans in particular here, we find a majority opposed to the athletes using, a majority opposed to the journalists using. But boy, they tied up 43-43 on whether or not gun owners should be using. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, we know that people who identify as Republicans or conservative are much more likely to support gun rights than are people on the left or in the Democratic Party. And so, I'm not particularly surprised by the result, but I think it is an indication that, as many observers have often said, marijuana policy, brings together many strange bedfellows from across the political spectrum. And this issue about people being denied the right to purchase firearms because of marijuana discrimination and prohibition, that I think provides an avenue for our movement to reach out to some of those people on the conservative side of the spectrum and say, look, this is plainly an issue about rights and freedom. And I think you've seen that particularly, U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. She's a Republican. She voted against legalization when it was on the ballot in her state. She voted against medical marijuana when it was on the ballot in her state. But since, just in the past few years, I think she actually told a story recently that she was going to purchase a gun at the gun shop, and she had to fill out the form, and she came across the question that said, if you are a person who uses marijuana, regardless of whether it's legal under your law, like check this box and you're going to get denied. She says she was kind of taken aback by that, and since has actually become one of the most vocal champions for marijuana law reform in the Senate. You know, she's not a legalization advocate. She's not a person who says medical marijuana is great, I want people to use it. But in a number of hearings recently, she's spoken up about the issue, about the conflict between federal and state law. And she, just last week, was one of the original co-sponsors of the CARES Act, the Comprehensive Medical Marijuana Bill.
Wow. So many strange things are happening. We get Don Young from Alaska being a founding member of the Cannabis Caucus. These Republicans in these legal states may be starting to come around. It's great news. Tom Angel from Marijuana Majority, and of course, the Marijuana Moment newsletter and massroots.com. We thank you for putting this poll out there and for coming on here to talk about it. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with, or any other contacts or websites you need to get out?
Yeah, I guess just two quick things. One, thank you, Russ, for everything you do to educate people who care about this issue and keep them up to date on the many, many developments on the federal, state, international, local levels, cultural development, science. You know, there's so many things happening every day. So thank you for educating people about that. And I guess, you know, also to that end, a little bit of a selfish plug. Subscribe to my newsletter, marijuanamoment.net. If you read that every morning and you listen to Russ every afternoon, you know everything you need to know.
You'll know everything you need to know, and I only know it because I get the newsletter in the morning myself. So thank you for having my prep time for the show. I appreciate it.
No problem, man.
Thanks to Tom Angel from Marijuana Majority for joining us on our special drug war data mining segment. We'll have more on a future episode.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association and the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit MJBA.net for more details. And now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
This is the life right here, man. They said weed wouldn't lead to harder drugs. They lied. Find out the truth about weed. DrugFreeWorld.org.
To combat this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at MJAgenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda. Kevin Sabet's boogeyman since 2012.
You have offended my family, and you have offended Shaman Temple.
Yes, might have gotten away with it, too. If it wasn't for these blasted kids and their dogs.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine from the Burning Issues podcast on CannabisRadio.com. Learn more at MJAgenda.com/about.
Athletes have long been held out as role models in our society, but now the conflict between societal disapproval of marijuana use and the emerging science of cannabis medicine, especially as it relates to chronic pain and head trauma suffered by football players and martial artists, is leading some athletes to take a stand. The Gridiron Cannabis Coalition presents this edition of Cannabis Sports Medicine.
Welcome to this edition of Cannabis Sports Medicine. I'm Russ Belville, and joining us on the phone, we have Michael Cindrich with the Gridiron Cannabis Foundation. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
A lot of people who have followed my reporting on this have heard my interviews with former NFL stars like Jim McMahon and Ricky Williams, Marvin Washington, and so forth. And we always referred to them as being part of the Gridiron Cannabis Coalition. So for people out there that might not know about the switch, what's the difference? Why are you now a foundation?
Well, we still have the Gridiron Cannabis Coalition, and we initially started the coalition for the purpose of education, research, and treatment. And we were very strong on the educational platform and started to get involved in some research projects. And then, throughout the course of operating the coalition, we realized that the majority of the work we were doing was essentially nonprofit work. And so we decided to set up a nonprofit foundation. And so, a 501c3 organization. We have our documentation pending with the IRS. And, that way we are a lot more flexible as far as being able to accept charitable donations and really just really focusing on the nonprofit work that we're doing.
So does that affect people who might want to donate to your organization as far as being able to take a tax deduction or something like that?
Absolutely.
Well, that's fantastic news. Now, another aspect of this I find interesting is, we hear from the NFL players about this issue a lot, but are you getting interest from people in other sports? And I'm thinking particularly boxing and MMA.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've spoken with boxers, people involved in MMA, baseball, basketball. I think when we started the coalition, there weren't as many athletes really coming out in support of medical cannabis and cannabis as a treatment for these different injuries and illnesses that athletes suffer. And I think we helped to bring some attention to this issue. And through that, we've been contacted by athletes in a wide array of sports that are facing similar issues, whether it be brain-related or chronic pain.
And of course, we hear a lot about that. The opioid epidemic is ravaging America, and we hear so much of these football players whose team doctors are just pumping them full of these really powerful opioid painkillers. What is the progress on working with the NFL on this issue?
It's very slow progress. We've been trying hard, but I think as far as the NFL's position, they need to see more evidence. And we believe the evidence is out there, but in establishing the foundation, our goal is to have treatment centers where players can come and basically detox off of their cocktails of prescriptions that they've been taking in many cases for decades, and be introduced to natural holistic treatments, specifically cannabis-based treatments. And we want to monitor them. We want to see the impact that cannabis is having on their overall health, and ultimately be able to present these findings to the NFL. And we're hopeful that is what they're looking for, and that we can really change policy when it comes to cannabis use within the NFL.
Recently, the NFL announced that this next oncoming season, they're going to be allowing the advertising of hard liquor. Now, they've previously allowed beer, of course. We see plenty of beer ads on NFL telecasts, but now they're adding hard liquor. But in the same document, they list the things they will not advertise. And of course, a lot of things in there make sense as far as violence or, anything that's derogatory racially or sexually or anything like that. But they also put marijuana on there. They specifically cite marijuana, where in the past they hadn't specifically cited such a thing. They just kind of lumped it in with illegal drugs. What do you think of this development? Does this bode well for your organization or not?
It doesn't sit well with me or with many of the players that we work with. As we all know, liquor is a very toxic substance and results in a lot of harm in our society. And it is legal, and because it's legal, people are able to advertise it. Players are able to use it, and then we have cannabis on the other hand that is natural. People are using it for true health purposes, and the NFL is not allowing any advertising related to cannabis or cannabis businesses. And I think that just shows how far we still have to go in this whole process.
Yeah, it's pretty frustrating when you look at the map and you find out that 3/4 of the NFL teams play in states with medical cannabis laws, and 1/4 of the teams play in states that have adult use legalization, at least if you count the team from Washington, D.C. is actually playing in Washington, D.C., which they don't really, but we'll count that for this purpose. Looking at other sports leagues, aside from the NFL, what is the progress on their acceptance of medical cannabis?
It seems like there's been more progress in some other leagues as far as a more of a hands-off approach, and we just haven't seen that from the NFL. I think anytime every week it seems like there's a new NFL player that testing positive for cannabis and getting put into the program, and it's just really it's bad for the NFL. It's bad for the players. Ultimately we want to see these people healthy and have access to the best possible treatment. And right now they're being deprived of that.
One other aspect of this marijuana in the NFL issue that always concerns me has to do with the college prospects who come out. They're all stars in college. They're highly sought after draft picks. They're expected to go in the first round. They're expected to get millions of dollars in contracts and signing bonuses. And then it's revealed that they test positive for marijuana. Their stock drops. They end up going in a later pick in the round. They end up losing a lot of the money that was expected in their contract. I'm thinking of guys like, Laramie Tunsil, for example. Has anybody in the foundation worked to calculate just how much has been lost to these players' salaries, their potential salaries, due to the marijuana issue?
We haven't, and that would be a very interesting study to undertake to try to determine how much lost revenue we've seen based on cannabis usage. But no, that's not something that we've done up to this point.
Another thing I think about also is, are some teams, some organizations more proactive on the marijuana issue than others? And I'm thinking particularly like the Indianapolis Colts, and their owners and coaches tend to be really anti-pot, but maybe the coaches on the West Coast aren't as bad, or is it pretty uniform throughout the league?
No, I think there are certain teams that take more of a hands-off approach to this issue. I think a lot of it just goes with the politics of the team and the owner and what their personal views are on this issue. And you'll have owners that, understand that there are players that are using this as a medicine and that it does have legitimate medical use. It's similar to society in general. Some people are for it, some aren't. Unfortunately, a lot of these owners aren't for it. And, that attitude trickles down throughout the rest of the organization and ultimately to the players. They still have duties with regards to the NFL, but as far as how they're going to approach it with the players, some take a little bit more of a hands-off approach.
I know that this is all tied up in the collective bargaining agreement between the National Football League or Players Association and the NFL itself. What is the timetable as far as renegotiating this particular contract, and do we feel positive about the chances that some good change might come of it?
The timetable is still a little bit uncertain on it. I feel confident that we will see some positive change. It will take some time. I think it's going to take more and more players coming out in support of the use. I think it's going to take the general public, and I believe that we do see people across the United States now that are in favor of medical cannabis that may not have been 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. But it's going to take additional public support, and you know what? It may take some change in regulation, change in laws on a federal level for some of these teams to really start feeling comfortable allowing this usage, and for the NFL to ultimately adopt medical cannabis as a treatment for their players.
It's one thing to consider medical cannabis use by professional athletes who, aside from, a few high school guys that jump into the NFL or the NBA immediately, for the most part, these athletes are 21 and older. Is there any push for recognition of medical cannabis use at the college sports level? And considering that some of those college players could be even just 18 years old, is that a problem?
I haven't seen a large push on a college level. I think it's extremely important for college players to start having access to the best possible medicine early on. These players are seeing just as many hits to the head as NFL players are. But I think that generally speaking, everyone is kind of looking at the NFL to set policy when it comes to cannabis use and medical cannabis use. And once that policy is set, I have a feeling that the NCAA and some of these different large colleges that carry weight in the decision-making process will start to look at this issue and try to determine whether cannabis can be used by its athletes.
I see. So, Michael Cindrich with the Gridiron Cannabis Foundation, you guys are doing some great work on getting athletes to speak out publicly. Does your foundation provide speakers or athletes to speak to particular events?
Absolutely. We have a list of athletes who are interested in providing education on this topic, and depending on what kind of event it is, where it's located, we have people that are generally interested in appearing and just sharing information and telling their stories. And I think that that's extremely important right now, is to get the message out, whether it's an athlete or even a non-athlete that has seen the medical benefits of cannabis. Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase the public support for this issue, because the more and more public support we get, ultimately that will impact the laws. And really, in the end, the goal is to impact policy in the National Football League and in other sports leagues.
Yeah, and speaking of these sports leagues, we focused on male sports. Do you have female athletes that are involved with the Gridiron Cannabis Foundation as well?
We've spoken with a few female athletes, not as many as we'd like. And if there are any listening out there, please feel free to contact our organization. We'd love to have you on the team. Yeah,
let's give them that contact information. How can they get in touch with you?
They can contact us at gridironcannabis.org or Mike at gridironcannabis.com is another way.
All right, Michael Cindrich, thank you so much for all the work you're doing with Gridiron Cannabis Foundation and trying to help these athletes to protect themselves, to treat themselves, and to avoid the painful, powerful opioid painkillers that are such a problem in this country today. We appreciate the work you're doing, and good luck.
Thanks a lot, Russ. We appreciate it.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
It's Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
And now, another episode of Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre. I'm your host, Leonard Pinth Garnell III. Tonight, we revisit a classic of the cannabis cinema, 1977's Animal House. While not known as a cannabis movie per se, this scene, reenacted by the Royal Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre Company, features a cannabis-smoking professor, played by Donald Sutherland, sharing a joint with his student Pinto, played by Thomas Hulse, while exploring the nature of the universe. Enjoy!
Verily, it appears as if the entirety of the heavens could be as one minuscule atom in the fingernail of a heretofore unknown colossus. Marvel upon marvel. So, logically, one minuscule atom in mine own fingernail could contain a microscopic entirety of the heavens. Oh, wouldst thou entertain my purchase of cannabis?
For Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre, I'm Leonard Pinth Garnell III.
The Marijuana Agenda, like the conservative agenda, minus the hypocrisy.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for the Cannabis Minority Report from the Minority Cannabis Business Association. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am ill. That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
People don't smoke marijuana.
Radical Rant.
Democrats are blowing it once again by not being a more rabidly pro-marijuana party. This comes to me from the newest survey out on Survey USA, commissioned by Marijuana Majority, where they asked some very interesting questions. And of course, the big news coming out of this is where the majority of people, 76%, the greatest number ever recorded, 76% of the American people believe that the federal government should stay out of the states when it comes to their marijuana laws. The actual question is, medical marijuana is recommended by a doctor to treat a medical condition and is legal in a majority of states. In 8 states, it is legal for adults over 21 to consume recreational marijuana legally without needing a doctor's involvement. But both medical and recreational marijuana use violate federal law. Regardless of your own views about the legalization of marijuana, should states be able to enact their own marijuana laws without interference from the federal government, or should the federal government arrest and prosecute individuals who are following state marijuana laws? Again, 76% of Americans say that the federal government should butt out of the states. Only 12% say that the federal government should do something about it. So you got a situation here where if you had 8 people in a room, 6 of them would say the Fed should stay out and only 1 of them should say the Fed should butt in. There's another 12% that are not sure. And that's great news, especially as you look across the demographics, age, gender, race, party affiliation, even among strong Republicans, nearly 2/3 of them, 65%, think that the federal government should butt out. Even among ideology, the very, very conservative, 56% say the federal government should butt out. So this is a very popular point. The problem Democrats have is they don't want to surround themselves around the states' rights talking point when it comes to marijuana for fear that's going to be used against them in other issues. And they don't have the ability to communicate the nuance, the difference between a state's right to marijuana versus, say, a state's right to certain gun laws or certain abortion laws. But I want to dig into some of these numbers down here where they asked about athletes, newspaper journalists, and gun owners and whether or not they should be punished. And Tom Angel made a great point that a lot of people really didn't know a damn thing about this issue. It was 14 to 16%, depending on the question, that had a not sure response to this. But when it came down to the issue of guns, the federal government makes it a crime to sell or possess guns if you are a known marijuana user, including legal medical marijuana or legal marijuana in the legal states. And Republicans split on this issue, 43 to 43, even though they were majority opposed to looking the other way when it came to journalists and athletes. So the gun issue here and the denial of Second Amendment rights to people who are legally operating and using marijuana in the states that allow it, here is a wedge issue for the Democrats just sitting on the table. You can wedge away some of those gun rights supporters, some of them Second Amendment supporters, even if they don't support marijuana legalization, to at least support the state's rights to do this sort of legalization. We got 3 out of 4 supporting it. We got almost 2/3 of the conservative Republicans supporting it, and a split here, 43-43, on whether or not marijuana users legally using it should be able to maintain their gun rights. Democrats, please heed my call and start taking this up as an issue. And again, I know it's a difficult one because of the need among many in the Democratic Party to tout stronger gun controls and gun regulation. But you tie that to what the people want as well. Simple things like universal background checks and terrorists on no-fly list shouldn't be able to get guns. You could make this a winning issue. You could wedge away the states' rights supporters against this tyrannical federal government that doesn't recognize our marijuana rights. Sadly, I'm afraid you won't do it.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!